影像截取卡。
那你知道这个东西多少钱？
上网找比较适合自己使用的公司。
好 ，OK。
因为它其实蛮多种。
OK， 谢谢。
Say hi to me, please. Hi. And now is our last session of today, and let's welcome Tuan Judy Tuan. And she's going to talk about making your Rails app more interactive with Angular.
Thank you. Yeah, so, hello everybody. My name is Judy Tuan, and I do have a Chinese name. It's Tuan. My grandfather gave me this Chinese name. So, 大家好. Hello. My GitHub and Twitter are Judy, and so on and so forth. Oh no. Okay. Maybe I should make it so that it's okay, so a little bit about me. First things first, I'm a software engineer at Indiegogo, which is a crowdfunding platform where you can fund what matters to you. So it's an open platform, and we have an ethos of empowering people to fund their dreams. So we don't have any restrictions, besides the terms of use. We don't have restrictions on who's allowed to use the platform to raise money. So right now we don't pay out in in Taiwanese currency, but we do accept many different kinds of currencies all over the world. I code in Ruby on Rails and in JavaScript, particularly Angular, so that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So just a little bit about me in my spare time. So in general, I like to combine things that I love. So for example, outside of work, I sing a cappella, combining music and wacky stage tactics. I've been singing with this group for over 10 years now. And I also like to dance. I'm an amateur dancer, and one of the things that I like to combine is I brought my Chinese dance ribbons from when I did Chinese folk dance as a very little girl in California, out to camp in the desert. And so this is a way that I found to combine both my past, my heritage, as well as my present. now that I was born and raised in America. So anyway, mostly the slide is just about how I like to combine different things and put them together. So we are all here at RubyConf for the win. So people love Ruby because it's optimized for programmer happiness. And then some of us are here and we are Rails programmers. I'm one of these people. I am not anyone else. So thank you for coming. And one of the reasons that people really like Rails is that it's a framework that optimizes for developer happiness along a different axis. Rails has a philosophy of doing things, taking care of the busy work of running a Rails server so that you can focus on your business logic, like we all know this. So users also love interactive experiences. And so, whoops, I forgot, but it doesn't turn here, sorry. People love Ruby, people love Rails, people love interactive experiences. So this is where JavaScript comes in. So it's nice to have responsive interactive web pages. When you click something, something zooms, or you click something and it changes immediately, or you load a form and you don't have to wait for full page reload. So our apps use more and more JavaScript. I remember even 2 years ago, another engineer on my team said something like, well, we're all Rails engineers, but these days, if you're a Rails engineer in San Francisco, you're spending 80% of your time in Ruby, or in JavaScript anyway. So we have, about 2 years ago, Indiegogo needed to move from a complicated flow for creating new campaigns to a single-page web app. So we had this idea that we could consolidate a very complicated user flow that we had in our app, which was an extremely important user flow, and simplify it and make it much better. So that was what led us to Angular. And before that, Indiegogo's JavaScript had been really noodly. We'd put it was in random files all over the site. There was a section of the site that was in CoffeeScript, Marionette, but only that section of the site. No one else used CoffeeScript and that kind of thing. So over the last couple of years, we've consolidated on Angular. So I'd like to share some of the things that we've learned with you. Okay, so why do I like Angular? I don't know. Are all of you already familiar with Angular, or do you like mostly? So I can do a really quick overview. Things appear, because of Angular's much lauded two-way binding, things appear to just work. When you click on them, things change, models get updated magically. You can, of course, choose to turn off the two-way binding to save on performance. And lots of things are going to change in Angular too, but that's outside the scope of my talk. So one of the things that drew me to Angular was that I thought there was a philosophy in common with Rails where just like Rails lets you focus on writing the business logic, JavaScript frameworks like Angular let you focus on the business logic of what makes your app different. And then you can let Angular take care of typical JavaScript type things for you. Other reasons that I really enjoy Angular are that you can make directives and you can define custom elements and plop them into your app, and they're reusable and modular. We found that we can sprinkle the same directive on multiple different parts of our Rails site. For example, our project card, if you look at our homepage, is one of these reused components on several different parts. It can be very satisfying to plop in a directive that you or someone else on your team already wrote before and have it available immediately, including styles and functionality. It's powerful. You can do anything with these. It's basically like creating your own new HTML elements that you have complete control over. And you can also separate your concerns. You can store your data and services, and there's a robust culture around testing. So those are some things about it. So in Indiegogo's case, why Rails plus Angular? So at Indiegogo, we're always thinking about the user. So let's say you've got your Indiegogo and you've got a legacy Rails app. It's time to update to some new technologies. Our campaigners and contributors expect speed and interactivity now. So in our case, we wanted to make it as easy as possible to create new campaigns or to contribute to existing campaigns. So, so that's the user part of the story. There's a different part of the story, which is developer speed. And this incorporates things such as modularity and testing. So, yeah. Okay, so let's go over some ways you can plot Angular into your Rails app. So the first thing that I'd like to cover is you need to get your JavaScript into the asset file. So we've got some gulp tasks that compiles our JavaScript into one file and puts it somewhere where the Rails app can load it. Next steps for our organization that we don't do yet include minification and source maps so that you can debug easily in the browser. We already have code coverage and linting. So look up, for libraries that cover all of these things, look up gulp, and you have to configure it for your app. We have it set up so that every time you make a JavaScript change, we have a watch command set up that watches for local file changes, and every time the file, it detects like file is saved, there's a change, it rebuilds that section of the JavaScript app, and copies it into the right place in our Rails directory, and then you refresh the page and see it there. So there are some places in our workflow that can be optimized, but that's what it is on the state. So you also have to consider how to load your bits of Angular in your view. We at Indiegogo, we've chosen to manage this in the controller and our ERB files. So, for a little story, my team of engineers, my team, had 2 interns this summer, and one of them started a few weeks earlier than the other. And when the newer one started, she said to the older one, "Hey, like, what are some tips? Do you have any tips for me to get up to speed?" In her first week, she was asking the other intern. And the other intern said, "Oh, as soon as I understood the data flow from the Rails, from the database to Rails, all the way through to how it shows up in Angular, then I was able to pick up my own stories and do things end to end." So that was the single most, he identified that right away as the single most useful thing for him to learn. And so that inspired me to write down this flow over here. So, so the first, I guess, 4 are Rails-related things, and then the last 3 are Angular-related things. So you'll have a piece of information in your database, and then it goes through your active record model, and then it goes through usually a serializer, and that goes through an API controller. And in our case, we use a Ruby gem called Rocket Pants to make our API. And we're using either API calls, or on first load we use a Ruby gem called Tuan, which stuffs information into a global map variable and makes it available as a JavaScript object, and your JavaScript sucks it up. So that's why I have the API org on here. And then once it's in your JavaScript, you'll have an Angular service that sucks up the information and holds it for you on the client side. After which point, you might have more API calls later to talk to the server, and it'll update itself. And then you have Angular directives that listen only to the service, so that the directives themselves aren't the ones like, trying to hold the information. There's something underneath, which we use the service to carry the information so that the directives have only one place to look. And you can have nested directives and know that they'll be looking at the correct thing. And then finally, directives will have HTML templates, and that's the actual markup. And so that is, of course, how you actually display information. Our interns were able to become functioning members of the team pretty quickly, which was an impressive feat for students, university students, new to both JavaScript and Ruby, and also Agile development. So, oh yeah, okay. So I wanted to tell a little story about Gone. Here are some like lessons learned when we at Indiegogo use Gone. We still use Gone, first of all. So the scenario went like this. At first, we didn't use Gone at all when we were doing Angular. We would just rely on API calls to do everything. And we discovered that this was not quite performant, because we would have to like wait for the page to load and then wait for a second network call to happen, and like then information would come and like, whoop, everything would show up. And so we started putting things in Gone. And what ended up happening is that you have to have really good discipline about putting things in Gone that are exactly the same as your API calls. So if they become different, or if you think, oh, the only stuff that you want to put in Gone are things that your app needs right when it loads for the first time. And then after that, if it changes, you don't update Gone anymore. Like you just don't care about Gone. So this introduced a couple of bugs. One kind of bug happened when there was some reason the initial state did not exactly reflect what we got back and forth from the API, and then data would get out of sync. Like we would drop fields, or we'd forget to include certain fields in one or the other, and that would cause problems. And the second kind of bug was developers accidentally overwriting new information from the server with old information from Gone, which was out of date. And so users would see, oh, there's some kind of bug that's making it so that my changes keep getting erased. We are actually in the process of moving away from using Gone. Because the primary reason we were using it was performance. So a little more on that later. But anyway, I just wanted to like give a sidebar to Gone because it is a very convenient way to get your data, at least for initial page load, to bootstrap your Angular app with data from Rails. And you set data into Gone like using the inside of your controllers, inside of your Rails controllers. Okay. So let's get up to speed on directives. And so I will just go really quickly over what I think is the bare minimum we need to know about directives to start putting them into your Rails app. So the objective is to make your directives modular. You want them to be reusable. And then you can plop them all over. So here's a very simple directive. Here is a very simple directive. Its name is my directive. I'll show you how to call it in HTML later. So the first thing I want to call out is that Angular has dependency injection, which means that you don't have to monolithically include everything in the world when you start your app. You tell each part, hey, I need the translation service, or I need this other kind of service. And this is also very useful for testing because you can not include things that you don't need specifically for this section of the app that you're testing. And you can also easily stub in fake objects, fake dependencies, like entirely fake windows and that kind of thing to test things that would otherwise be difficult to test. So we find that we use dependency injection for all kinds of things, including window resize. So, okay. So, and you have to attach your directive somewhere. And so basically, it's like don't be afraid of like just showing up multiple places. You'll get used to it soon enough. So, okay. The second thing I'd like to point out is that the whole thing is wrapped in an iffy, an immediately invoked function expression, and we are wrapping everything that we write in iffy. So like every JavaScript file is just a whole iffy, and we were finding that to be useful because it prevents pollution of the global namespace. So what we're doing is wrapping all of our JavaScript inside of a function expression and then invoking it immediately. And so then we're concatenating a whole bunch of different JavaScript files and we end up with a bunch of these ifs. So, then we've got restrict, which is over here. And so if you look at the docs, it'll like seem to be really overwhelming. There's like restrict E and A and C. So nobody ever uses C, don't use C. People do use E and A, and so if you use E, you call it like my directive in the HTML, and it's a completely new element, so E stands for element. And if you use A, you still use an actual HTML element, but use the attribute feature. And you can say like restrict EA, and it could use either. We end up not using that. So there's some conventions about when you want to use E versus when you want to use A. One of the gotchas is that for styling, if you use E, it'll be an inline element. If browsers won't know if the browser doesn't know what it is, on first page load, it'll be an inline element, and so you'll want to make sure that your CSS styles make it. You have to explicitly say like, hey, make me display block. Otherwise, it'll be inline, and you might get confused. Okay, so and then the next thing is on scopes. So if you read the documentation, it'll say like true, false. Use isolate scopes. That means you're not inheriting scopes from your parent object, and not only that, and this is important for modularity because it means you don't assume that things live inside of a particular other thing. So things aren't dependent on other things existing, so that way you can plot them into other pages. And you may pass in information using attributes. So here's an example of passing in a Boolean value from our Rails DRD. So the last line is an example of, let's say I was invoking this directive in Rails, and I'm actually giving a Boolean value to this attribute jumping from directly inside of Rails. And then the last thing that I want to show you is link. And so you put all of your business setup logic in here. For example, functions that you might call on ngclicks, or let's say you need to initialize with some state that you're passing in with a scope object. You use link to set scope.mything, and then your directive, your template will have access to this thing. So, right? Okay. And so here's an example of a template. If it's super simple, you can go ahead and inline it right away. If it's like one line, otherwise you can put it in one file. And you'll have anything that you define to be in the scope available here. So that's an example of. And I want to say something about snake case, camel case, and kebab case. Snake case is what we're all familiar with in Rails. Camel case is what we're all familiar with in JavaScript. And kebab case, I see more and more, well, kebab case is used in HTML, and I see it more and more in JavaScript files. So there is, Angular gives us auto camel casing from Angular to its own HTML templates. The directive names are camel case in our JavaScript files, but hyphenated kebab case style in our HTML templates. So you may be tempted to make your Rails snake case stuff, to take all of your snake case stuff and turn it into camel case for you to use in your JavaScript. And we actually attempted that with a gem called AngularJS Rails resource. And it ended up being more heavyweight than we needed. And so there's no need to process your data, post-process your data from Rails. Just leave it as snake case. It's okay to look at just a little bit. So leave it as snake case when you're grabbing it, and then put it into nice JavaScript and camel case variables. So my recommendation actually is not to use any of the Rails resource. We tried that, and we actually moved away from it. So so there are a couple of quirks, like things that we're still working on. Loading speed, we've tried 2 different things for loading speed. One of them is basically do nothing and just have a loading indicator. The other one is actually duplicate everything in Rails VBRB view. So that would be the initial state of the page, including any dynamic content. That is not ideal because then you're duplicating everything. And people are like, why are you going to use Angular? And if you make a change, you have to remember to make it in both places. So we really, really want to move away from that, and we're looking into preprocessing. So I hope to be able to tell you much more about preprocessing soon. And then one of the other things that we're working on is separating out our JavaScript code. We have taken our JavaScript out into a separate repository, and there are pros and cons to this. And we are trying to move towards an NPM style solution where we would include our JavaScript, our versions of JavaScript on deploy by using npm install, like a private node. And the final thing that we're still working on, like that's an open problem for our organization, is all of our CSS is in the monorail, or what we call a monorail. It's in our monolithic Rails app. And so anyway, in the last few seconds, I'm going to say some do's and don'ts. So I think when you have a new feature, make a new tiny Angular app, and do these components. Don't mix up your templates, like don't put too much Angular into your Rails ERB, because you'll get weird flashing as Rails sets up something, shows it to you on the browser, and then Angular takes over and takes it away. So, and don't skip JavaScript tests. We ran into a situation where we were like, oh, this is an experiment. We'll temporarily only use acceptance tests in our Rails app. And this was a temporary setup, and of course we kept this temporary setup for a long time. And then new members to the team thought that this was official. So be careful about the promises that you make to yourself. If you make a trade-off like this to make a deadline, make sure you actually go back and clean up after yourself. But of course, it's better not to make such a drastic trade-off in the first place. Try not to like skip your writing your JavaScript tests. It's worth it in the long run. So anyway, this is my information. Oh, I keep forgetting to advance the slide. Okay, so this is my information. I hope that this sort of lightning fast overview like gets you on your way to me or your Rails app. And check out Indiegogo and okay, thank you.